Chapter 6. Voltaire's Cognitive Biases, a Critical Examination. Section 1. Key Cognitive Biases in Voltaire's Thought. Enumeration. Confirmation bias, favoring information that supported his anti-religious stance. Attribution bias, attributing negative outcomes to religious institutions while overlooking their positive contributions. Overgeneralization, applying specific instances of religious abuse to all religious belief systems. Anchoring bias, relying heavily on early negative experiences with religious authority to form lasting views on religion. Framing bias, presenting religion in a negative frame to influence public perception. Fundamental attribution error, blaming religion for human flaws rather than broader societal and historical factors. Negativity bias, focusing disproportionately on the failures and abuses of religious institutions while ignoring their successes. Self-serving bias, emphasizing his role as a champion of reason and free thought while downplaying his own shortcomings. In-group bias, fostering a sense of intellectual superiority among Enlightenment thinkers and dismissing opposing views. Bandwagon effect, embracing popular Enlightenment critiques of religion without fully exploring counterarguments. Skepticism bias, excessive skepticism toward religious or metaphysical claims while overlooking their potential merits. Status quo bias, preference for existing states of affairs and resistance to traditional religious authority. Availability bias, focusing on immediate examples of religious abuses to form judgments about religion as a whole. Selective attention bias, focusing on religion's negative aspects while ignoring its societal benefits. Section 2. Detailed explanation of Voltaire's cognitive biases. Voltaire's powerful intellect and influence on the Enlightenment are undeniable, but like all individuals, his thinking was shaped by cognitive biases, subtle, often unconscious tendencies that can distort judgment and reasoning. These biases had a significant impact on his critique of religion and religious institutions, particularly Christianity. Below, we critically examine each of these cognitive biases and how they influence Voltaire's thought. Confirmation bias. Chapter 7. Logical errors in Voltaire's critique of religion. Section 1. Key logical errors in Voltaire's critique of religion. Enumeration. Straw man fallacy, misrepresenting religious doctrines to make them easier to attack. Hasty generalization, drawing sweeping conclusions about all religions based on limited examples. False dilemma, presenting a binary choice between reason and faith, ignoring their potential harmony. Equivocation fallacy, using ambiguous terms to mislead or confuse the reader. Ad hominem attacks, attacking religious leaders and figures instead of addressing their ideas. Appeal to emotion, relying on emotional manipulation rather than logical argumentation to critique religion. Slippery slope fallacy, arguing that religious belief inevitably leads to oppression and violence. Circular reasoning, assuming the conclusion in the argument by stating that reason invalidates religion without proving it. Faulty cause and effect reasoning, blaming religion for societal problems without considering other contributing factors. Composition fallacy, assuming that what is true of a part specific religious abuses must be true of the whole, all of religion. Section 2. Detailed explanation of Voltaire's logical errors. Voltaire's brilliant critiques of religion, particularly Christianity, have left a lasting impact on modern thought, especially during the Enlightenment. However, despite his sharp wit and intellectual prowess, Voltaire's arguments against religion often fell victim to several significant logical errors. These. Chapter 8. Voltaire's hermeneutic errors, misreading the Bible. Section 1. Key hermeneutic errors in Voltaire's interpretation of the Bible. Enumeration. Literalism without context, interpreting biblical texts literally without considering historical and cultural context. Overlooking genre distinctions, failing to distinguish between different literary forms in the Bible, such as poetry, prophecy, and parable. Ignoring theological symbolism, misunderstanding symbolic language and theological motifs central to Christian doctrine. Cherry-picking verses, isolating specific verses to support preconceived critiques without considering the broader biblical narrative. Misapplying modern standards, judging biblical texts by modern ethical and scientific standards rather than understanding their ancient context. Moral anachronism, applying modern moral values to ancient biblical texts, leading to distorted critiques. Reductionism, reducing complex theological concepts to simplistic ideas that fit Voltaire's preconceived notions. Failure to engage with the Christian interpretive tradition, neglecting centuries of theological commentary that provide deeper understanding. Misunderstanding covenantal theology, overlooking the significance of biblical covenants and their unfolding nature across the Old and New Testaments. Neglecting the Christological focus of the Bible, failing to see the unified message of redemption and Christ's role as the central figure. Section 2. Detailed explanation of Voltaire's hermeneutic errors. Chapter 9. Scientific errors in Voltaire's worldview. Section 1. Key scientific errors in Voltaire's worldview. Enumeration. Overconfidence in Newtonian mechanics as a complete model of the universe. Rejection of the possibility of miracles, based solely on early scientific understanding. Dismissal of non-material explanations for phenomena. Assumption that science and religion are fundamentally incompatible. Misunderstanding of the role of metaphysics in scientific inquiry. failure to anticipate scientific developments beyond the Enlightenment, such as quantum physics and relativity, reduction of human consciousness and morality to mechanistic processes, neglect of the limitations of empirical science in addressing existential questions, conflation of scientific methodology with philosophical materialism, underestimation of the scientific contributions made by religious institutions and figures. Section 2. Detailed explanation of Voltaire's scientific errors. Voltaire's commitment to rationality and empirical science is often praised as one of his greatest intellectual contributions to the Enlightenment. However, despite his brilliance, Voltaire made several significant scientific errors in his worldview. These errors stemmed from an overconfidence in the Newtonian paradigm, a limited understanding of science's philosophical dimensions, and a reductionist approach to human nature and religion. In this chapter, we will explore the key scientific errors that shaped Voltaire. Chapter 10. Voltaire's Critique of Christianity, a Rebuttal. Section 1. Key elements of Voltaire's critique of Christianity, enumeration. Rejection of the Bible as a divine text, arguing that it is full of contradictions and myths. Criticism of Christian doctrines, particularly the Trinity, original sin and salvation. Opposition to the moral authority of the Church, claiming it perpetuates corruption and oppression. Denial of miracles and supernatural events, arguing they are irrational and impossible. Accusation that Christianity promotes ignorance, stating that it discourages reason and scientific inquiry. Belief that Christianity fosters intolerance, citing historical examples such as the Inquisition and religious wars. Focus on the negative impact of Christianity on individual freedom, asserting that it suppresses free thought and human progress. View that Christianity is unnecessary for morality, claiming that reason alone can lead to moral behavior. Critique of Christian eschatology, rejecting ideas of judgment, heaven, and hell as manipulative. Perception that Christianity is a political tool, used to control populations and maintain power structures. Section 2. A rebuttal to Voltaire's critique of Christianity. Voltaire's critique of Christianity is one of the most influential intellectual assaults on the faith in modern history. His sharp attacks on the Bible, Christian doctrine, and the Church were central to his broader agenda of promoting rationalism and secularism. However, while Voltaire raised legitimate concerns about certain historical abuses of power by religious authorities, his critique often rested on misunderstandings, exaggerations, and logical errors. In this chapter, we will provide a rebuttal to Voltaire's major critiques of Christianity, addressing his claims with a more balanced and nuanced perspective. Rejection of the Bible as a divine text. Voltaire dismissed the Bible as a collection of contradictions, myths, and superstitions, arguing that it could not be divinely inspired. However, this critique is based on a literalist reading of the Bible, which Voltaire imposed in order to attack its credibility. Biblical scholarship, including within the Christian tradition, acknowledges that the Bible is composed of diverse literary genres, from poetry to historical narrative to prophecy, and that it requires careful interpretation within its cultural and historical contexts. Additionally, many of the so-called contradictions in the Bible have been addressed by theological explanations that show how these differences can coexist within a complex, multi-layered text. Rather than being a simplistic mythical collection, the Bible offers profound insights into human nature, morality, and the divine when interpreted through its proper context and with an understanding of its symbolic and theological dimensions. Criticism of Christian doctrines. Voltaire particularly criticized core Christian doctrines such as the Trinity, original sin, and salvation through Jesus Christ. He argued that these doctrines were irrational or contradictory. However, these critiques reflect Voltaire's limited understanding of theological concepts and philosophical traditions. For example, the doctrine of the Trinity, while complex, is a profound philosophical articulation of God's nature as a relational being, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, whose essence is love and community. Similarly, the doctrine of original sin offers a deep reflection on human brokenness and the universal tendency towards selfishness and disorder, which can be observed throughout history. These doctrines are not illogical, rather, they require philosophical engagement and an understanding of their symbolic and existential depth. Opposition to the moral authority of the Church. Voltaire often criticized the moral authority of the Church, pointing to historical instances of corruption, oppression, and abuse of power. While it is true that the Church, like any human institution, has experienced periods of moral failure, it is important to distinguish between the failings of individuals and the teachings of Christianity itself. The teachings of Jesus Christ emphasize love, compassion, justice, and mercy, values that have inspired countless acts of charity, social reform, and moral progress. Many of the greatest movements for human rights and justice, from the abolition of slavery to the civil rights movement, have been deeply rooted in Christian teachings. While Christians and the Church have often fallen short of these ideals, the core message of Christian ethics remains a profound source of moral guidance. Denial of miracles and supernatural events. Voltaire rejected the possibility of miracles and supernatural events, claiming that they were irrational and impossible. However, this critique assumes that the natural laws observed by science are absolute and inflexible, a view that has since been challenged by developments in modern physics, such as quantum mechanics. The Christian belief in miracles does not require a rejection of natural laws, but rather an understanding that God, as the Creator, can intervene in His creation in extraordinary ways. Miracles, in the Christian view, are signs of God's presence and power in the world, revealing a reality that transcends material explanations. While miracles cannot be empirically tested, they serve a theological and spiritual purpose, pointing to the mystery of God's interaction with the world. Accusation that Christianity promotes ignorance. Voltaire claimed that Christianity, particularly the Church, discouraged scientific inquiry and promoted ignorance. However, history shows that many of the greatest scientific minds were themselves Christians, or were deeply influenced by Christian thought. Figures like Isaac Newton, Johannes Kepler and Gregor Mendel saw no contradiction between their faith and their scientific work. In fact, Christianity's belief in a rational, orderly creator provided the philosophical foundation for the development of the scientific method, as it suggested that the natural world operates according to consistent laws that can be studied and understood. While certain historical events, such as the trial of Galileo, have been used to argue that Christianity opposes science, these are exceptions rather than the rule. The broader historical relationship between Christianity and science has been one of mutual influence and cooperation. Belief that Christianity fosters intolerance. Voltaire pointed to examples such as the Inquisition and religious wars to argue that Christianity fosters intolerance and violence. While these historical events are undeniable, it is important to recognize that they were often driven by political and economic factors rather than purely religious motivations. Moreover, these events do not reflect the teachings of Christ, who preached forgiveness, love for enemies and peace. Throughout history, many Christians such as St. Francis of Assisi, William Wilberforce and Mother Teresa have been at the forefront of movements for tolerance, non-violence and social justice. The misuse of religion by political leaders for their own gain does not invalidate the peaceful and loving message of Christianity. Focus on the negative impact of Christianity on individual freedom. Voltaire argued that Christianity suppresses individual freedom and free thought. However, this critique overlooks the Christian concept of freedom as rooted in spiritual liberation rather than mere autonomy. Christianity teaches that true freedom is found in self-giving love, moral integrity and service to others, rather than in the pursuit of personal desires. The Christian understanding of freedom is not about license to do whatever one wants, but about becoming free from sin and self-centeredness, thereby finding true fulfillment in God. Many Christian thinkers such as Augustine and C.S. Lewis have written extensively about the transformative power of Christian freedom, which leads to a life of purpose, meaning and joy. View that Christianity is unnecessary for morality. Voltaire claimed that reason alone could lead to moral behavior, and that Christianity was unnecessary for ethics. While reason can certainly contribute to moral understanding, it is limited in its ability to address deeper questions of human nature, sin, and the purpose of life. Christian morality is not just a set of rules, but a relationship with God that transforms the heart and mind. The teachings of Jesus, especially the command to love one's neighbor as oneself, offer a vision of morality that goes beyond mere rational calculation and speaks to the deepest longings of the human soul. Christian ethics are grounded in the belief that human beings are made in the image of God, and that our moral duties are rooted in love, sacrifice and service to others. Critique of Christian eschatology. Voltaire rejected Christian beliefs about heaven, hell and judgment, viewing them as manipulative tools used by the Church to control people through fear. However, Christian eschatology is not about fear-mongering, but about offering hope for ultimate justice and the restoration of creation. The belief in a final judgment reflects the Christian conviction that good and evil are real, and that justice will ultimately be done. The promise of heaven is not merely an escape from earthly suffering, but the fulfillment of God's purpose for humanity, a life of eternal communion with God. Christian eschatology offers hope for both individual redemption and the renewal of the world, providing a powerful moral framework that gives meaning to human life and history. Perception that Christianity is a political tool. Voltaire often portrayed Christianity as a political tool used by rulers to control populations. While it is true that political leaders have at times used religion to legitimize their power, this critique ignores the subversive power of Christianity, which has often stood in opposition to unjust political systems. Jesus Christ himself was executed by the Roman authorities, precisely because his message challenged the existing political and religious order. Throughout history, Christians have played key roles in resisting tyranny and promoting justice, from the early Christian martyrs who refused to worship the Roman emperor, to the abolitionists who fought to end slavery, to the civil rights leaders like Martin Luther King Jr. who drew on Christian principles to fight for equality. Far from being a tool of political control, Christianity has often been a source of moral courage in the face of oppression. In this rebuttal to Voltaire's critique of Christianity, it becomes clear that his attacks, while sharp and influential, often relied on misunderstandings and simplifications. A more balanced examination of Christianity reveals a faith that is intellectually rich, morally profound, and deeply concerned with human dignity, freedom, and justice. Voltaire's critique, while valuable in sparking debate, fails to fully engage with the depth and truth of the Christian tradition.